30 Christmas candies from Betty Crocker's 1950s holiday cookbook sat on every coffee table in America. Panouche, divinity, bourbon balls. Grandmothers made them for pennies and wouldn't dream of serving store-bought candy to guests.
These candies look divine, Betty. A toast to your impeccable taste.
Cheers!
Today, you won't find a single one. They vanished the day we decided homemade looked cheap, and Whitman's samplers looked classy. We're bringing them back. Here's number 1. Panouche, the brown sugar fudge that tasted like butterscotch heaven. This was fudge made with brown sugar instead of white sugar, which gave it a deep caramel flavor. In 1955, Panouche cost about 40 cents to make. That's roughly $4.50 today. You needed brown sugar, butter, milk, and pecans. Betty Crocker's technique required precision. Boil brown sugar, butter, and milk to softball stage, 236 degrees. Remove from heat. Beat until it lost its shine and started to thicken. Stir in pecans. Pour into a buttered pan. The result was smooth, creamy fudge that tasted like caramel and butter. This candy disappeared when chocolate fudge dominated everything, but Panouche is richer and more interesting than chocolate. You can make it for about $6 today. Divinity, the cloud-like candy that melted on your tongue. This was fluffy white candy made from sugar syrup beaten into egg whites until it formed stiff, glossy peaks. In 1950, Divinity cost about 35 cents per batch. That's roughly $4 today. The ingredients were simple: sugar, corn syrup, egg whites, and vanilla. Betty Crocker's method was specific. Boil sugar and corn syrup to hard ball stage, 260 degrees. Pour the hot syrup slowly into beaten egg whites while mixing constantly. Beat until the mixture held stiff peaks and lost its shine. Drop by spoonfuls onto wax paper. The candy would set in about an hour. Each piece was light, sweet, and incredibly addictive. Divinity disappeared because it required perfect weather. High humidity prevented it from setting. By the 1980s, most people bought candy instead of fighting with weather conditions. You can make it for about $5 today. Bourbon balls, the adult candy that packed a punch. These were no-bake candies made from crushed vanilla wafers, powdered sugar, cocoa powder, corn syrup, chopped pecans, and real bourbon. Each piece had a boozy kick that wasn't for children. In 1950, these cost about $1 per batch. That's roughly $11 today. A bottle of bourbon cost about $4, but you only needed a quarter cup. Betty Crocker's recipe was straightforward. Crush vanilla wafers into fine crumbs. Mix with powdered sugar, cocoa, pecans, corn syrup, and bourbon. Roll into 1-inch balls. Roll each ball in powdered sugar or cocoa. Store for at least 2 days before serving. The aging mellowed the bourbon flavor and let everything blend together. After a week, they were perfect. These candies disappeared when boozy desserts fell out of favor, but they're making a comeback at craft cocktail bars. You can make them for about $12 today. Chocolate peppermint creams, the candy that tasted like peppermint patties but better. These were soft peppermint fondant centers dipped in dark chocolate. In 1955, these cost about 75 cents per batch. That's roughly $8 today. You needed powdered sugar, butter, peppermint extract, and chocolate for dipping. Betty Crocker's technique created smooth fondant. Mix powdered sugar with softened butter and peppermint extract until it formed a smooth paste. Roll into small balls. Chill until firm. Melt chocolate in a double boiler. Dip each ball in chocolate using a fork. Let excess chocolate drip off. Place on wax paper to set. The result was creamy peppermint filling surrounded by dark chocolate shell. These disappeared when York peppermint patties became ubiquitous, but homemade versions taste fresher and more minty. You can make them for about $10 today. Opera creams, the fancy candy with the mysterious name. These were soft fondant candies flavored with vanilla, shaped into ovals, and topped with a pecan half. The name opera supposedly came from them being sold at opera houses in the 1800s. In 1955, these cost about 60 cents per batch. That's roughly $7 today. Betty Crocker's recipe used a cooked fondant. Boil sugar, corn syrup, and water to soft ball stage. Pour onto a marble slab or cold platter. Let it cool slightly. Work it with a spatula until it turned white and creamy. Flavor with vanilla. Shape into small ovals. Press a pecan half on top of each one. The candies were smooth, sweet, and melted in your mouth. They tasted like vanilla clouds with nutty crunch. You can make them for about $8 today. 5 candies down, 25 to go, and you're already seeing the pattern. Every single one was a Christmas tradition. Every single one cost under $3 in 1955. Every single one disappeared when convenience replaced craftsmanship. But here's where it gets interesting. The next 5 candies are even more obscure. These are the candies that only appeared in handwritten recipe cards passed between neighbors. If you've never heard of seafoam or pralines, you're about to understand why your grandmother's candy plate was better than yours. Seafoam, Divinity's caramel-flavored cousin. This was like Divinity, but made with brown sugar instead of white sugar, which gave it a golden color and butterscotch flavor. In 1950, seafoam cost about 40 cents per batch. That's roughly $4.50 today. Betty Crocker's technique was identical to Divinity. Boil brown sugar and corn syrup to hard ball stage. Beat into stiff egg whites. Drop by spoonfuls. The brown sugar created a flavor that was richer and more complex than plain Divinity. The candy had the same fluffy texture but tasted like caramel clouds. Seafoam disappeared along with Divinity. Same weather problems, same difficulty. But if you can make Divinity, you can make seafoam. It's actually more interesting because of the brown sugar depth. You can make it for about $6 today. Pralines, the New Orleans candy that went mainstream. These were flat, round candies made from brown sugar, cream, butter, and pecans. The mixture was cooked until it reached soft ball stage, then beaten until creamy, and dropped by spoonfuls onto wax paper. In 1955, pralines cost about 80 cents per batch. That's roughly $9 today. Betty Crocker's recipe simplified the traditional New Orleans version. Boil brown sugar, cream, and butter together. Add pecans. Cook to soft ball stage. Remove from heat. Beat until the mixture started to thicken and turn opaque. Working quickly, drop by large spoonfuls onto wax paper. Each praline would spread into a flat disc studded with pecans. The result was creamy, crunchy, and intensely sweet with deep caramel flavor. Pralines disappeared outside the South when regional candies became less common. You can still find them in New Orleans, but homemade versions are better. You can make them for about $10 today. Molasses taffy, the candy that required muscle and patience. This was old-fashioned pulled taffy made with molasses, which gave it a dark color and complex flavor. In 1950, taffy cost about 30 cents per batch. That's roughly $3.30 today. Betty Crocker's recipe was simple but labor-intensive. Boil molasses, sugar, butter, and vinegar to hard ball stage. Pour onto a buttered platter. Let it cool until you could handle it. Butter your hands. Pull the taffy, stretch it out, fold it back, stretch again. Keep pulling for 10 to 15 minutes until it turned lighter in color and developed a satiny sheen. Pull it into a long rope. Cut into pieces with buttered scissors. Wrap each piece in wax paper. The taffy was chewy, slightly bitter from the molasses, and incredibly satisfying. Molasses taffy disappeared when pulling candy became obsolete. You can make it for about $5 today. Coconut bonbons, the candy that looked like snowballs. These were balls of sweetened shredded coconut mixed with condensed milk, shaped into rounds and dipped in chocolate. In 1955, these cost about 70 cents per batch. That's roughly $8 today. Betty Crocker's technique was foolproof. Mix shredded coconut with sweetened condensed milk and vanilla until it held together. Roll into 1-inch balls, chill until firm. Dip each ball in chocolate using a fork. The result was sweet coconut filling surrounded by dark chocolate. Homemade bonbons have more coconut and less filler. You can make them for about $9 today. Butterscotch drops, hard candy that tasted like liquid butter and sugar. These were cooked sugar candies flavored with butter and vanilla, dropped onto wax paper, and left to harden. In 1950, these cost about 25 cents per batch. That's roughly $3 today. Betty Crocker's recipe required a candy thermometer. Boil sugar, corn syrup, butter, and water to hard crack stage, 300 degrees. Remove from heat. Stir in vanilla. Working quickly, drop by teaspoonfuls onto buttered wax paper. The drops would spread slightly and harden as they cooled. Each piece was golden, translucent, and tasted like pure butterscotch. These candies disappeared when hard candies became something you bought in bags at grocery stores. Werther's Originals replaced homemade butterscotch drops, but homemade versions taste richer because they use real butter. You can make them for about $4 today. Rehook 10 candies down, 20 to go. And here's what you're noticing. None of these candies are difficult. They're just unfamiliar. We stopped making them because we forgot they existed, not because they weren't worth making. The next 10 are even more forgotten. These appeared in Betty Crocker's regional editions, the ones distributed only in certain parts of the country. These are the candies that vanished when candy making became commercialized and regional traditions were erased. Let's keep going. Maple creams, the candy that tasted like Vermont in December. These were soft fondant candies flavored with real maple syrup, shaped into small rectangles and sometimes topped with a walnut half. In 1955, these cost about $1 per batch. That's roughly $11 today. Real maple syrup was expensive even then. Betty Crocker's recipe used pure maple syrup. Boil maple syrup to soft ball stage. Pour onto a cold surface. Work it with a spatula until it turned creamy and opaque. Shape into small rectangles. The result was smooth, creamy candy that tasted intensely of maple. These disappeared when maple flavor became associated with cheap pancake syrup. By the 1980s, most people had never tasted real maple candy. You can make them for about $15 today if you use real maple syrup. Cherry cordials, the fancy candy with liquid centers. These were whole maraschino cherries surrounded by fondant, dipped in chocolate. The magic was that the fondant would liquefy after a few days, creating a liquid center. In 1950, these cost about $1 per batch. That's roughly $11 today. Betty Crocker's technique created the liquid center. Make fondant with powdered sugar, butter, and invertase, an enzyme that breaks down sugar. Wrap each cherry in fondant. Chill until firm. Dip in melted chocolate. Let them age for 3 days. The invertase would turn the fondant into syrup. The result was chocolate shell, liquid fondant, and a cherry in the center. These disappeared when Queen Anne cordial cherries became available in boxes, but homemade versions taste fresher and less artificial. You can make them for about $12 today. Marzipan fruits, the candy that looked like tiny, perfect fruit. These were almond paste candies shaped and painted to look like miniature apples, pears, oranges, and strawberries. In 1955, marzipan cost about $1.50 per batch. That's roughly $17 today. Almond paste was expensive. Betty Crocker's recipe used store-bought almond paste. Knead almond paste with powdered sugar until smooth and pliable. Add food coloring to create different colors. shape into tiny fruits, paint details with food coloring mixed with vodka. The alcohol evaporated, leaving pure color. The candies were sweet, almond-flavored, and incredibly realistic-looking. Marzipan fruits disappeared when they became associated with expensive European candy shops. By the 1980s, most Americans had never seen them. You can make them for about $20 today. Peanut brittle, the candy that required perfect timing and courage. This was a thin sheet of hardened sugar syrup studded with roasted peanuts. In 1950, peanut brittle cost about 50 cents per batch. That's roughly $5.50 today. Betty Crocker's technique required nerve. Boil sugar, corn syrup, and water to hard crack stage. Stir in peanuts and butter. Add baking soda. The mixture would foam dramatically. Pour immediately onto a buttered baking sheet. Spread thin with a buttered spatula. Let it cool completely. Break into pieces. The result was thin, crispy candy with roasted peanut flavor. The baking soda created tiny air bubbles that made it easier to bite. Peanut brittle disappeared when it became something you bought in tins at Christmas. But homemade brittle is thinner, crispier, and has more peanuts. You can make it for about $7 today. Chocolate fudge, the original, the classic, the one everyone tried to master. This was smooth, creamy chocolate candy made by cooking sugar, milk, chocolate, and butter to soft ball stage, then beating until it thickened. In 1955, fudge cost about 60 cents per batch. That's roughly $7 today. Betty Crocker's recipe was the gold standard. Boil sugar, milk, chocolate, and corn syrup to soft ball stage, 236 degrees. Remove from heat. Add butter, but don't stir. Let it cool to 110 degrees. This was crucial. Beat vigorously until the mixture lost its shine and started to thicken. Pour into a buttered pan. Cut into squares when firm. The result was smooth, creamy fudge that melted in your mouth. Fudge disappeared when people stopped using candy thermometers. By the 1990s, most fudge came from shops or was made with marshmallow creme, which doesn't require precise temperature. You can make real fudge for about $8 today. Rehook 15 candies down, 15 to go. And we're entering the truly obscure territory now, the candies that appeared in Betty Crocker's holiday cookbook for only a few years before vanishing completely. These are the experiments, the regional specialties, the candies that even your grandmother might not remember, but every single one deserves to be rediscovered. Let's finish strong. Coconut ice, the British candy that became an American Christmas tradition. This was a two-layer candy, white coconut fondant on the bottom, pink coconut fondant on top. In 1950, coconut ice cost about 40 cents per batch. That's roughly $4.50 today. Betty Crocker's recipe was simple. Mix shredded coconut with sweetened condensed milk and powdered sugar. Divide in half. Leave one half white. Color the other half pink with food coloring. Press the white layer into a pan. Press the pink layer on top. Chill until firm. Cut into squares. The candy was sweet, coconutty, and had a grainy texture that was oddly satisfying. Coconut ice disappeared when layered candies became unfashionable. You can make it for about $6 today. Turkish Delight, the candy from Narnia that actually existed. This was a gel-like candy flavored with rosewater, cut into cubes, and dusted with powdered sugar. In 1955, Turkish Delight cost about 70 cents per batch. That's roughly $8 today. Betty Crocker's recipe used gelatin and cornstarch. Boil sugar, water, and corn syrup. Add gelatin and cornstarch mixture. Cook until thick and translucent. Add rosewater and food coloring. Pour into a pan. Let it set overnight. Cut into cubes. Dust with powdered sugar mixed with cornstarch. The result was chewy, floral, and unlike any American candy. Turkish Delight disappeared because rosewater tasted too exotic for most Americans. By the 1980s, it was only found in Middle Eastern grocery stores. You can make it for about $9 today. Popcorn balls, the candy that was also a snack. These were popped corn bound together with sugar syrup, shaped into balls, and wrapped in wax paper. In 1950, popcorn balls cost about 20 cents per batch. That's roughly $2.20 today. Betty Crocker's recipe was economical. Popcorn, make sugar syrup by boiling. Sugar, corn syrup, water, and butter to hardball stage. Pour over popcorn. Mix quickly. Butter your hands. Shape into balls while the mixture was still warm. The result was sweet, crunchy, and satisfying. Popcorn balls disappeared when they became associated with Halloween instead of Christmas. By the 1980s, parents worried about homemade treats. You can make them for about $4 today. Candied orange peel, the candy that turned trash into treasure. This was orange peel boiled in sugar syrup until translucent, then dried and dipped in chocolate. In 1955, candied peel cost almost nothing. You used peels that would otherwise be thrown away. Betty Crocker's technique transformed them. Cut orange peel into strips. Boil in water 3 times to remove bitterness. Simmer in sugar syrup until translucent. Let them dry on a rack overnight. Dip in melted chocolate. The result was chewy, sweet, and intensely orange-flavored with dark chocolate coating. Candied peel disappeared when people stopped making candy from scratch. It seemed too fussy, too time-consuming. You can make it for about $6 today. Peppermint bark, the candy that's making a comeback. This was layers of dark chocolate and white chocolate topped with crushed candy canes. In 1950, this cost about $1 per batch. That's roughly $11 today. Betty Crocker's recipe was straightforward. Melt dark chocolate, spread in a thin layer on a baking sheet. Let it set. Melt white chocolate, spread over the dark chocolate. Immediately sprinkle with crushed candy canes. Let it set completely. Break into pieces. The result was crunchy, minty, and beautiful, with red candy cane pieces in white chocolate. Peppermint bark disappeared in the 1970s, but came back in the 2000s. Williams-Sonoma popularized it again. You can make it for about $12 today. Rehook 20 candies down, 10 to go. And here's what's remarkable. These last 10 candies are the ones that required the most skill. These weren't simple drop candies or no-bake treats. These were advanced candy making, the recipes that separated casual bakers from serious candy makers. If your grandmother made any of these, she was showing off. Let's see what she knew. Fondant, the base for dozens of other candies. This was cooked sugar syrup that was worked until it turned white, smooth and creamy. You could flavor it, shape it, or use it as centers for dipped chocolates. In 1955, fondant cost about 50 cents per batch. That's roughly $5.50 today. Betty Crocker's technique required patience. Boil sugar, corn syrup, and water to softball stage. Pour onto a marble slab or cold platter. Let it cool to lukewarm. Work it with a spatula, scraping, folding, spreading, until it turned white and creamy. This took 15 to 20 minutes of constant work. Knead until smooth. Store in an airtight container. The fondant would keep for weeks. You'd pinch off pieces, flavor them, and shape them into candies. Fondant disappeared when it became easier to buy pre-made fondant. You can make it for about $6 today. Caramels, the candy that required perfect temperature control. These were soft, chewy candies made by cooking sugar, cream, butter, and corn syrup to firm ball stage. In 1950, caramels cost about 70 cents per batch. That's roughly $8 today. Betty Crocker's recipe was precise. Cook sugar, cream, butter, and corn syrup slowly, stirring constantly. The mixture would darken as it cooked. When it reached firm ball stage, 245 degrees, remove from heat. Pour into a buttered pan. Let it cool completely. Cut into squares. Wrap each piece in wax paper. The candy inside candy bars that nobody makes at home. This was whipped egg whites mixed with cooked sugar syrup, then studded with nuts and dried fruit. In 1955, nougat cost about $1 per batch. That's roughly $11 today. Betty Crocker's technique was complex. Boil sugar and corn syrup to hardball stage. Beat egg whites until stiff. Pour hot syrup slowly into egg whites while beating constantly. The result was chewy, sweet, and studded with nuts and fruit. Nougat disappeared because it was too difficult for home candy making. By the 1980s, it only appeared inside commercial candy bars. You can make it for about $12 today. The candy that required nerve and perfect timing. This was butter and sugar cooked to hard crack stage, poured thin, topped with chocolate and nuts. In 1950, toffee cost about 60 cents per batch. That's roughly $7 today. Betty Crocker's recipe was straightforward but unforgiving. Cook butter and sugar together, stirring constantly. The mixture would bubble violently. When it reached hard crack stage, 300 degrees, pour immediately onto a buttered baking sheet, spread thin. While still warm, spread melted chocolate over the top. Sprinkle with chopped almonds. Let it cool completely. Break into pieces. The result was buttery, crunchy toffee with chocolate and nuts. Toffee disappeared when Heath bars became available, but homemade toffee is richer and more buttery. You can make it for about $8 today. The after-dinner candy that melted on your tongue. These were soft cream mints made from powdered sugar, butter, and peppermint extract, shaped into small patties. In 1955, mints cost about 30 cents per batch. That's roughly $3.30 today. Betty Crocker's recipe was simple. Mix powdered sugar with softened butter and peppermint extract until smooth. Add a tiny bit of cream if needed. The mixture should be like soft dough. Roll into small balls. Press flat with a fork. Let them dry overnight. The mints would firm up as they dried. Each piece was smooth, creamy, and melted in your mouth with cool peppermint flavor. These disappeared when Andes mints became the standard after-dinner mint. But homemade mints taste fresher and more minty. You can make them for about $5 today. Marshmallows. Yes, people made these at home. These were fluffy, pillowy candies made from gelatin, sugar syrup, and vanilla. In 1950, marshmallows cost about 40 cents per batch. That's roughly $4.50 today. Betty Crocker's technique required precision. Bloom gelatin in cold water. Boil sugar and corn syrup to soft ball stage. Pour hot syrup over gelatin. Beat with an electric mixer for 10 to 15 minutes until thick, white, and fluffy. Pour into a pan dusted with powdered sugar and cornstarch. Let it set for several hours. Cut into squares. Dust with more powdered sugar mixture. The result was marshmallows that were lighter, fluffier, and more vanilla-forward than store-bought. These disappeared when Kraft and Campfire marshmallows became cheap and convenient. You can make them for about $6 today. Peanut butter fudge. Chocolate fudge's less popular but equally delicious cousin. This was smooth, creamy fudge made with peanut butter instead of chocolate. In 1955, this cost about 60 cents per batch. That's roughly $7 today. Peanut butter was affordable. A jar cost 55 cents, and you needed 1 cup, which was about half a jar. Sugar was cheap at 10 cents per pound. Milk cost 20 cents per quart. You needed 1 cup. Corn syrup cost 25 cents per bottle and lasted for months. Butter was the expensive ingredient at 70 cents per pound, but you only needed 2 tablespoons. The total came to about 60 cents, and that batch made enough fudge to fill an 8-inch pan with 2 dozen squares. Betty Crocker's recipe was similar to chocolate fudge, but with one crucial difference: the peanut butter. The technique started the same way. Combine sugar, milk, and corn syrup in a heavy-bottomed saucepan. The corn syrup prevented crystallization and kept the fudge smooth instead of grainy. Stir the mixture over medium heat until the sugar dissolved completely. You'd see the granules disappear as the liquid became clear. Attach a candy thermometer to the side of the pan, making sure the bulb didn't touch the bottom. Bring the mixture to a boil without stirring. This was important. Stirring during boiling could cause sugar crystals to form on the sides of the pan, which would make the entire batch grainy. Cook to soft ball stage, exactly 236 degrees Fahrenheit. Watch the thermometer carefully. The mixture would bubble vigorously and smell sweet and slightly caramelized. When it hit the target temperature, remove from heat immediately. This was where peanut butter fudge diverged from chocolate. Stir in peanut butter and butter while the mixture was still hot. The peanut butter would melt instantly from the residual heat. Use smooth peanut butter, not chunky. Chunky peanut butter would create texture issues in the final fudge. The butter added richness and helped create that melt-in-your-mouth texture. Stir until both were completely incorporated and the mixture was uniform in color and consistency. Let it cool to lukewarm, about 110 degrees. This cooling period was critical. Touch the bottom of the pan to check. It should feel warm but not hot. This took about 15 to 20 minutes. Some people set the pan in a larger pan of cool water to speed up the process, but you had to be careful not to let any water splash into the fudge. While it cooled, the mixture would thicken slightly, and the surface would develop a thin film. Beat until it lost its shine and started to thicken. This was the moment that separated perfect fudge from failed fudge. Use a wooden spoon and beat vigorously. The mixture would transform from glossy and pourable to matte and thick. You'd feel the resistance increase as you stirred. The fudge would start to hold the shape of the spoon's trail. This took anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes of continuous beating. Your arm would get tired, but you couldn't stop. The moment the fudge started to lose its shine, you had to work quickly. Pour into a buttered pan immediately. An 8-inch square pan was perfect. Use a spatula to spread it evenly, but work fast. The fudge would begin to set within seconds. Let it cool completely at room temperature for at least 2 hours. Cut into squares with a sharp knife. If the knife stuck, wipe it clean between cuts. The result was smooth, creamy fudge that tasted like peanut butter cups. The texture was perfect, firm enough to hold its shape, but soft enough to bite through easily. The peanut butter flavor was intense and pure. Each piece was rich and satisfying. The sweetness was balanced by the slight saltiness of the peanut butter. This was comfort food in candy form, familiar, nostalgic, and deeply satisfying. This disappeared when chocolate fudge dominated everything. By the 1970s, when people said fudge, they meant chocolate fudge. Peanut butter fudge became a regional specialty, something you only found at church bake sales in certain parts of the country. Chocolate was universal. Peanut butter was niche, but peanut butter fudge is rich, satisfying, and perfect for peanut butter lovers. It deserves the same respect as chocolate fudge. You can make it for about $8 today. Peanut butter costs about $4 per jar. Sugar is $3 for 5 pounds. Almond toffee, toffee taken to the next level. This was butter and sugar toffee studded with chopped almonds throughout, then topped with chocolate and more almonds. In 1950, this cost about 80 cents per batch. That's roughly $9 today. Betty Crocker's technique added almonds at 2 stages. Cook butter and sugar to hard crack stage. Stir in chopped almonds, pour onto a buttered baking sheet. While warm, spread with melted chocolate. Sprinkle with more chopped almonds. The almonds throughout the toffee added crunch and nutty flavor. The result was richer and more complex than plain toffee. Almond toffee disappeared when English toffee became a specialty shop item. You can make it for about $10 today. Chocolate truffles, the fancy candy that's surprisingly easy. These were ganache centers rolled in cocoa powder, looking like the expensive French mushrooms they were named after. The name truffle came from their resemblance to the rare, knobby fungi that grew underground and cost a fortune. But chocolate truffles were accessible luxury. They looked and tasted expensive, but required only two main ingredients and minimal skill. In 1955, truffles cost about $1 per batch. That's roughly $11 today. Heavy cream was the expensive ingredient at 35 cents per pint. You needed 1 cup, which was half a pint. Good quality chocolate cost 50 cents for an 8-ounce bar. Cocoa powder for rolling cost 20 cents per tin. The total came to about $1, and that batch made 2 dozen truffles. Betty Crocker's recipe was straightforward and nearly foolproof. Heat heavy cream in a small saucepan until it just started to simmer. Don't let it boil. Boiling would make it too hot and could split the chocolate later. You'd see tiny bubbles forming around the edges of the cream. That was the signal. Remove it from heat immediately. While the cream heated, chop chocolate into small, uniform pieces. The smaller the pieces, the faster and more evenly they'd melt. Place the chopped chocolate in a heat-proof bowl. Pour the hot cream directly over the chocolate. Let it sit undisturbed for 1 full minute. This waiting period was crucial. It gave the chocolate time to soften from the heat of the cream without any agitation. After a minute, stir gently with a rubber spatula. Start from the center and work outward in small circles. The chocolate would begin to melt and blend with the cream. Keep stirring slowly and steadily. The mixture would transform from broken pieces of chocolate in cream to a smooth, glossy, unified ganache. This process took about 2 minutes of gentle stirring. If any chocolate pieces remained unmelted, you could place the bowl over a pot of barely simmering water for 30 seconds and stir again. But for truffles, the next step was essential. Chill until firm enough to scoop. Cover the bowl with plastic wrap pressed directly onto the surface of the ganache. This prevented a skin from forming. Refrigerate for at least 2 hours, or until the ganache was firm but still scoopable. You'd know it was ready when you could press your finger into it and it held the indentation but didn't feel rock hard. Use a melon baller or small spoon to form balls. A melon baller created uniform spheres which looked professional, but a regular teaspoon worked fine. Just scoop out about a tablespoon of ganache at a time. The ganache would be cold and firm, but still slightly sticky. Roll each scoop quickly between your palms to form a rough ball. Your hands would warm the ganache slightly, making it easier to shape. Work quickly. If your hands got too warm, the ganache would melt. Some people wore disposable gloves to keep the process cleaner. Others just accepted that chocolate truffle making meant getting chocolate on their hands. Place the formed balls on a baking sheet lined with parchment paper. When all the ganache was shaped, return the tray to the refrigerator for 30 minutes. This firming step made the final coating easier. Roll each truffle in cocoa powder. Place unsweetened cocoa powder in a shallow bowl. Drop a truffle into the cocoa. Use a fork to roll it around until completely coated. Lift it out with the fork, letting excess cocoa fall back into the bowl. Place the finished truffle on a clean plate. Repeat with all the truffles. The cocoa coating served multiple purposes. It prevented the truffles from sticking together, added a bitter contrast to the sweet ganache, and created that signature rough, earthy appearance that mimicked real truffles from the forest floor. The result was rich, creamy chocolate that melted in your mouth. Each truffle was intensely chocolatey, more concentrated than any chocolate bar. The ganache center was smooth and silky. The cocoa powder coating was slightly bitter and dry, which balanced the sweetness perfectly. When you bit into a truffle, the outside gave way to the soft center. The chocolate melted from your body heat, coating your tongue. These were sophisticated, elegant, and absolutely delicious. They tasted like something from a French chocolatier, not something made in a home kitchen. Truffles disappeared from home candy making because they seemed too fancy, too French, too difficult. The name alone intimidated people. Truffles sounded like something that required culinary school training. The process seemed mysterious and complex. By the 1980s, chocolate truffles were only found in expensive chocolate shops in glass cases, selling for $2 or $3 each. Godiva made truffles famous as luxury gifts. Seeing them in fancy boxes with gold foil made people forget that truffles were originally simple peasant candy, just chocolate and cream. Butterscotch fudge, the final candy, and maybe the best. This was fudge made with brown sugar and butterscotch chips, creating deep caramel flavor that tasted like liquid gold. In 1950, this cost about 70 cents per batch. That's roughly $8 today. A bag of butterscotch chips cost 35 cents. They were a specialty item, not as common as chocolate chips. Brown sugar was cheap at 20 cents per pound. Butter cost 40 cents per pound, but you only needed half a stick. Milk was subsidized and affordable. The ingredients were simple, but the technique required precision and patience. Betty Crocker's technique combined two methods to create foolproof fudge: boil brown sugar, milk, and butter together in a heavy-bottomed saucepan. The heavy bottom was crucial. It distributed heat evenly and prevented scorching. Stir constantly as the mixture heated. The brown sugar would dissolve completely. The butter would melt and incorporate. The milk would create a smooth base. Attach a candy thermometer to the side of the pan. Cook the mixture to soft ball stage, exactly 236 degrees Fahrenheit. This temperature was critical. Too low and the fudge wouldn't set. Too high and it would become grainy and hard. Remove from heat the moment it reached temperature. This was where Betty Crocker's genius showed. Stir in butterscotch chips immediately. Don't add them during cooking. Add them after. The residual heat from the hot sugar mixture would melt the butterscotch chips perfectly. They'd dissolve into the fudge base, adding extra butterscotch flavor and creating an incredibly smooth texture. The chips also added fat, which made the fudge creamier. Stir until the chips melted completely and the mixture was glossy and uniform. Let it cool to lukewarm, about 110 degrees. This was the hardest part. You had to wait. Most people wanted to beat it immediately, but patience was essential. If you beat it while it was too hot, the fudge would stay soft and never set properly. If you let it cool too much, it would harden in the pan before you could beat it. Lukewarm was the sweet spot. Test it by touching the bottom of the pan. It should feel warm, but not hot. Beat until thick. Use a wooden spoon and beat vigorously. The mixture would start to lose its shine. It would thicken noticeably. Your arm would get tired. This took 5 to 10 minutes of constant beating. The fudge would change from glossy and fluid to matte and thick. When you could see the spoon leaving trails in the mixture, it was ready. Pour immediately into a buttered pan. An 8-inch square pan worked perfectly. Don't spread it too thin or it would dry out. Let it set at room temperature for at least 2 hours. Cut into squares with a sharp knife. The result was smooth, creamy fudge that tasted like concentrated butterscotch. The flavor was deep and complex, not just sweet, but rich with caramel notes from the brown sugar and buttery notes from the butterscotch chips. Each bite melted on your tongue. The texture was perfect, firm enough to hold its shape, but soft enough to bite through easily. This wasn't grainy or crumbly like failed fudge. This was professional quality candy made at home. This was richer than panouche, sweeter than caramel, and more interesting than chocolate fudge. Panouche was good, but it was one-dimensional, just brown sugar flavor. Butterscotch fudge had layers. The brown sugar provided the base. The butterscotch chips added depth. The butter added richness. The milk added creaminess. Together they created something greater than the sum of their parts. Caramel was intense and slightly bitter. Butterscotch fudge was mellow and sweet. Chocolate fudge was familiar and safe. Butterscotch fudge was adventurous and memorable. Butterscotch fudge disappeared along with butterscotch's popularity. By the 1990s, butterscotch was seen as old-fashioned and boring. Younger generations associated it with their grandparents. Butterscotch candies were what old people kept in their purses. Butterscotch chips gathered dust on grocery store shelves. Nobody wanted to make butterscotch anything when chocolate, vanilla, and caramel dominated the dessert world. Food trends moved toward exotic flavors: salted caramel, dark chocolate with sea salt, matcha, lavender. Butterscotch seemed quaint and outdated by comparison, but butterscotch is a beautiful flavor. Warm, sweet, buttery, and comforting. It tastes like autumn and home and nostalgia. It's the flavor of butter and brown sugar cooked together until they transform into something magical. Butterscotch doesn't need to be trendy. It just needs to be remembered. This fudge proves that butterscotch deserves a comeback. One bite, and you'll understand why your grandmother made this every Christmas. 30 Christmas Candies from Betty Crocker's 1950s holiday cookbook. Everyone was a tradition. Everyone cost under $3. Everyone disappeared when we traded homemade for store-bought. These weren't complicated candies. They were careful. Panoche, divinity, bourbon balls. Your grandmother made these every December. They cost almost nothing and tasted better than anything we buy today. Pick one and make it this Christmas. Give yourself an afternoon in the kitchen. Fill your house with the smell of butter, sugar, and caramelizing sweetness. See what your grandmother knew, that the best Christmas candies can't be bought. They have to be made. Let me know in the comments which one you're trying first. And if you want more forgotten Betty Crocker recipes from the 1950s, I'll see you in the next video. These 30 candies represent more than just recipes. They represent a time when Christmas was made, not purchased. When showing love meant spending time, not spending money. When the value of a gift was measured in hours of labor, not dollars on a price tag. Your grandmother didn't make these candies because she had to. She made them because that's what Christmas was. The act of candy making was the tradition itself, not just the eating, but the making. The kitchen would smell like sugar and butter for days. The counter would be covered with cooling racks and wax paper. Children would sneak pieces when she wasn't looking. Neighbors would stop by for samples. The candy would be packed into tins and given as gifts, wrapped in tissue paper with handwritten tags. Betty Crocker understood this. Her cookbooks weren't just instruction manuals, they were guides to creating tradition. Every recipe came with context, with stories, with the understanding that food was about connection. When she wrote "beat until thick," she knew that beating fudge for 10 minutes gave you time to think, to remember, to be present. When she specified softball stage, she knew that learning candy temperatures made you competent and confident. When she said share with neighbors, she knew that candy making was community building. The 1950s were the peak of home candy making. Sugar rationing from World War II had ended. Kitchen equipment had improved. Electric mixers, candy thermometers, better stoves. Women had time. The post-war economy meant many middle-class families could afford to have one parent stay home. Magazines and cookbooks promoted elaborate holiday traditions. Making candy was aspirational. It showed you had the skills, the time, and the ingredients to create something special. But it was also economical. A batch of fudge cost 60 cents and made 2 dozen pieces. Store-bought candy cost $1 per pound. Making your own meant you could have more candy for less money. It meant you could customize flavors, add extra nuts, use real vanilla, adjust the sweetness. It meant you could make exactly what your family liked instead of settling for what stores sold. The decline started in the 1960s. More women entered the workforce. Convenience became valuable. Time became scarce. Store-bought candy improved in quality and dropped in price. By the 1970s, making candy at home seemed old-fashioned. By the 1980s, it seemed unnecessary. By the 1990s, it seemed impossible. Who had time to stand over a stove stirring fudge when you could buy a box at Walgreens? But something was lost in that trade. The smell of butter and sugar cooking, the satisfaction of making something with your hands, the pride of serving homemade candy to guests, the tradition of spending an afternoon in the kitchen creating something from scratch, the connection between generations. Grandmothers teaching granddaughters how to tell when fudge reached softball stage, how to beat divinity until it held peaks, how to dip chocolates without leaving fingerprints. These candies also represented regional identity. Pralines were Southern, Panouche was New England, divinity was rural, bourbon balls were Kentucky. Marzipan fruits were German-American. Each candy carried the history of the people who made it. When we stopped making these candies, we lost those regional distinctions. Christmas candy became homogenized. The same Hershey's Kisses and Reese's Cups from coast to coast. The recipes themselves are time capsules. They use ingredients that were common in the 1950s but rare today. Corn syrup was in every pantry. Now it's controversial. Marshmallow creme was standard. Now it's seen as processed junk. Candied fruit was normal. Now it's mocked. Lard was cooking fat. Now it's taboo. These recipes show us what people valued, what they had access to, what they considered normal. They also show us how much cooking knowledge has been lost. Betty Crocker assumed her readers knew what softball stage meant, what cream of tartar did, how to tell when egg whites reached stiff peaks. She assumed they owned candy thermometers, double boilers, marble slabs for working fondant. She assumed they had the patience to stand over a stove stirring constantly, the arm strength to beat fudge for 10 minutes, the judgment to know when candy was done by look and feel, not just temperature. Modern cooks have lost that knowledge. We rely on boxed mixes and pre-made ingredients. We use recipes that specify exact times instead of teaching us to recognize doneness. We're afraid of candy making because it seems technical and unforgiving. But our grandmothers made candy without fear. They learned by doing, by failing, by trying again. They understood that candy making was a skill you developed, not a talent you were born with. The cost comparison is striking. In 1950, making candy at home was economical. Today, it's still cheaper than buying artisan candy from specialty shops, but it's more expensive than buying mass-produced candy from grocery stores. A batch of homemade fudge costs $8 and makes 2 dozen pieces, 33 cents each. A bag of Hershey's miniatures costs $4 and contains about 40 pieces, 10 cents each. But those 10-cent pieces taste like wax and chemicals. The 33-cent pieces taste like real butter, real chocolate, real vanilla. The time investment is real. These candies take time. Panouche takes 45 minutes. Divinity takes an hour. Truffles take 3 hours, including chilling time. In our modern world where time is money, that feels expensive. But the time spent making candy isn't wasted. It's invested in creating something beautiful, invested in learning a skill, invested in creating memories, invested in continuing tradition. There's also something meditative about candy making, the repetitive motions, stirring, beating, rolling, the focus required, watching temperatures, judging consistency, timing perfectly, the sensory experience, smells, textures, tastes. Making candy forces you to slow down, to be present, to pay attention. In our distracted, multitasking world, that's valuable. These candies also taste different from store-bought. They taste like real ingredients. Real butter has a flavor that margarine can't match. Real vanilla extract tastes complex and floral compared to imitation vanilla. Real chocolate melts smoothly and tastes rich compared to chocolate-flavored coating. Fresh cream whips into something light and delicate compared to Cool Whip. When you make candy from scratch, you taste the difference. The texture is different too. Homemade fudge is smooth and creamy, not grainy. Homemade divinity is light and fluffy, not dense. Homemade truffles melt in your mouth, not sit there like a lump. The difference comes from technique, from fresh ingredients, from making small batches instead of industrial quantities. Presentation matters. Homemade candy looks homemade, slightly imperfect, charmingly irregular, obviously made by hand. That's not a flaw, it's a feature. It shows care and effort. It shows that someone spent time making this specifically for you. A box of homemade candy is a gift that says, I value you enough to spend my afternoon making something special. A box of store-bought candy says, I stopped at Walgreens on my way over. The environmental impact is worth considering. Making candy at home creates minimal waste. No plastic packaging, no shipping emissions, no industrial processing. The ingredients come in recyclable containers. The finished candy can be wrapped in reusable tins or compostable paper. Compared to individually wrapped commercial candy shipped across the country in plastic bags, homemade candy is dramatically more sustainable. There's also food safety to consider. When you make candy at home, you know exactly what's in it. No preservatives, no artificial colors, no mysterious ingredients you can't pronounce. If you have allergies or dietary restrictions, you can adjust recipes accordingly. If you want organic ingredients, you can choose them. You have complete control over what goes into your body. The social aspect of candy making has been lost. Making candy used to be a communal activity. Women would gather in someone's kitchen and spend an afternoon making multiple batches together. They'd share equipment, trade recipes, help each other troubleshoot problems. Children would watch and learn. Men would sample and praise. The candy-making session was as much about socializing as it was about producing candy. These 30 candies are a gift from the past. They're recipes that worked then and still work now. They're techniques that our grandmothers mastered and we can learn. They're flavors that deserve to be remembered and celebrated. They're traditions that shouldn't die just because they're old. Make one. Make all 30. Make them every year until they become your tradition. Make them with your children so they learn. Make them with your friends so you laugh together. Make them alone so you have time to think. Make them because they taste good. Make them because they connect you to the past. Make them because creating something with your hands is satisfying. Make them because your grandmother would be proud. The best Christmas candies can't be bought. They have to be made. Not because store-bought candy doesn't exist, but because the act of making is where the magic lives. In the stirring and the waiting and the hoping it turns out right. In the smell that fills your kitchen and the taste that fills your mouth. In the pride of creating something beautiful and the joy of sharing it with people you love. These candies are more than sugar and butter. They're history and memory and tradition and love made visible. They're proof that some things are worth the time, worth the effort, worth preserving. They're proof that old-fashioned doesn't mean obsolete, it means tested and proven and true. Pick one and make it this Christmas. Start with something simple like peanut butter fudge or bourbon balls. Work your way up to divinity and truffles. Make mistakes and learn from them. Burn a batch and try again. Share your successes and laugh at your failures. Create new memories while honoring old traditions. See what your grandmother knew, that the best things in life take time. That love is spelled T-I-M-E. That creating something with your hands feeds your soul in ways that buying never can. That tradition matters. That flavor matters. That doing things the old way sometimes produces better results than doing things the new way. Your grandmother understood something we've forgotten, that the process is the point. Standing over a hot stove stirring fudge for 10 minutes wasn't wasted time. It was meditation. It was presence. It was the moment when her mind could wander to memories of her own grandmother, teaching her the same recipe. The repetitive motion of stirring became a rhythm that connected past to present to future. Every batch of candy carried those memories forward. She knew that shortcuts have costs. Buying candy saved time, but lost meaning. The candy dish, filled with store-bought chocolates, said nothing about who she was or what she valued. But the candy dish filled with homemade panouche said everything. It said she cared enough to spend her afternoon creating something specifically for the people she loved. It said her time was valuable, and she chose to spend it on them. It said this family, this home, this moment mattered enough to do things properly. She understood that convenience is seductive but hollow. You can buy a pound of fudge at any grocery store for $8. You can unwrap it, arrange it on a plate, and serve it to guests. It takes 5 minutes. But those 5 minutes produce nothing but full stomachs. The homemade fudge that takes an hour to make produces full stomachs and full hearts. It produces conversation. How did you make this? It produces compliments. This is the best fudge I've ever tasted. It produces requests. Will you teach me your recipe? It produces memories. Years later, someone will say, "Remember that Christmas when you made that incredible butterscotch fudge?" Your grandmother knew that some things can't be delegated to factories and corporations. Making extra to share with neighbors. It taught pride, displaying your creations and accepting compliments. These lessons transferred to every other area of life. Children who learned to make candy learned to persevere, to pay attention, to take pride in their work. Make these candies. Remember the past. Create the future. Connect the generations. Feed your family. Share with your neighbors. Start traditions. Keep traditions. Be proud of what you make. Because in the end, these aren't just candies. They're connections. To the past, to each other, to ourselves. And some connections are too valuable to let die.